Made for Me, Chapter 24. Danielle entered the office Monday morning on an empty stomach. She couldn't eat. All she could think about was meeting with Lars. The first note in her email was a calendar invitation for Ulrich at 11:30, followed by Lars at noon. Ugh, she would have liked to get this over with as soon as possible. She kept her head down trading, not looking up for any reason other than to say thank you to Glenda for bringing her a cup of tea. Good luck today, Glenda said under her breath. Danielle wanted to die of embarrassment. You heard? Danielle nodded her head sympathetically. There were a series of meetings this morning and your name was overheard, along with Andre's. Danielle put her head to her hand. While her fingers were cold from nerves, her face was flushed at the realization that everyone knew her to be in such flagrant violation of a firm rule. Well, you might as well start packing my things now. Glenda raised both her eyebrows. Are you kidding me? She whispered, glancing over her shoulder. This has happened with men before, and they always stay. She paused then, looking at Danielle meaningfully. May I give you some unsolicited advice? Danielle looked at the woman intently, wondering what in the world she was going to tell her. Of course. Go in strong, stay strong. It's the only thing they respect around here. Glenda didn't elaborate on what Danielle should stay strong about, but her words were forefront in Danielle's mind as she entered Ulrich's office. Sit down, please, he said formally, shutting the door after her. Straight to business then. Crap, she was going to be fired. Well, she might as well get herself mentally prepared to be sued as well. To say that management is unhappy would be an understatement. We had a special meeting this morning and the senior partners met with counsel. Before I get into that, Danielle, I must ask you this, and I need an honest answer. Were you involved with Andre before your introduction with Georgi or after? Danielle didn't hesitate. Before. She watched Ulrich's head hang down like he couldn't believe it. But Ulrich, what you need to understand is I met Andre the second day I was here through my good friends at their restaurant. It wasn't until 1 week ago when Georgi brought him into the office that I learned he was a client by virtue of his family. Ulrich raised his head, a bit of life coming back into his face. Still, he was skeptical. You are telling me that for the entire time, 3 months, you two didn't talk about your work and you didn't run a check on him? Danielle was offended. Of course I ran a check on him. Do it yourself. It comes up clean. Ulrich hesitated for a moment and his eyes grew wide. No, here he is. Ulrich disputed as he typed on his computer. Danielle shook her head. Sure, he's there now because he was added to the account, but if you look back when I started and search on Andre Mettler, he's not there. Ulrich glared at her. Mettler? Georgi's last name is Mettlerin. Danielle sat still. Andre told me months ago it was Mettler, and that's the name I searched. Ulrich's fingers tapped across the keyboard, his eyes scanning the screen. A minute passed, then 2. Well, Ulrich said in a low voice, the press indicates Andre goes by Mettler, a shortened version of the family name used by the younger generation, and you are correct. His name didn't come up prior to the date he was added, either by Mettler or Mettlerin. Danielle exhaled, her relief infinite. And no, she continued, we didn't talk much about my work. All he knew was that I worked for MRD at the trader's desk. He had no idea that I worked on his father's account, and I had no idea he was related to Georgi. Ulrich quietly considered this information and again tapped on the keyboard. He intently watched his screen. This might change everything. Danielle waited until he finished typing and his eyes stopped darting back and forth across the screen. She imagined him instant messaging Lars and Jacqueline, requesting the paperwork for her release being put on hold momentarily. I've just informed Lars, Ulrich said. Your meeting with him will be delayed a half hour while he meets with the partners. Danielle, you may get a reprieve, but I'm not positive. Danielle wasn't sure how she felt, at the edge of the noose and given a delay, only to be hung anyway. But Danielle, this doesn't answer the question as to why you kept seeing him after you knew of his affiliation with the firm. Danielle appealed to the man's sense of romance. It had only been a week, she said defensively, then realized how lame the response sounded. The bottom line is I was waiting until the weekend. He raised an eyebrow and she imagined him trying not to scoff. Because 7 days was going to make a difference? Danielle nodded, feeling the rush of emotions associated with letting go of a relationship that wasn't broken. It's that serious? Ulrich asked, his eyebrows pushing so hard he made wrinkles on his forehead. Danielle barely moved her head, but it was enough. And what does Andre want you to do? Quit and work for another firm? And be with him? Danielle nodded again. You did tell him the consequences of such an action. As well as Georgi, Danielle wanted him to know. Ulrich's fingers began typing again, his eyes flicking back and forth to hers. And what did he say? Georgi told me not to leave, but also not to stop dating his son. Ulrich stopped typing. He picked up the phone. We need to talk, was all he said. His eyes went across to an unidentifiable point on the wall. Be right down. His attention turned back to her. What are you going to do, Danielle, if it comes to a hard decision? You know exactly what I'll do, she said evenly. I'll honor my commitments. Ulrich stared at her hard, pressed his lips together and stood. I hope so. 40 minutes later, Glenda told her that it was time to meet with Lars. Danielle buzzed his door and waited for the familiar click to admit entry. Lars didn't look up from his computer as she approached. She'd only heard of disciplinary discussions with bosses, having never experienced one herself. Of course, her employment history consisted of 2 firms, so it wasn't like she'd had a lot of opportunities to screw up. Please have a seat, he said flatly without looking at her. She approached his desk, the setup unfamiliar. Before this, they'd always had collegial chats in the sitting area. She sat, cross-legged, hands folded on her lap, and waited. David was rather disappointed to learn of the turn of events. Lars's gaze was still on the screen. Danielle kept her hands flat, though they were pressed hard against one another. She imagined David being shocked and appalled about her continuing the relationship once she learned Andre was a client, and he was likely pissed off about losing future revenue. She remained quiet, listening to the laser printer spit out sheets of paper. Lars's handsome face had grown only more so with the contained fury that she saw moving beneath the surface. The muscles of his jawline were fixed, his eyes burning with controlled anger. Lars reached back, retrieving his printouts. Danielle pushed her shoulders straight, determined to leave the office with the knowledge that at least he was appreciative of all the millions she'd made him. I don't need to explain that you committed the singular act I said was unacceptable, he began, his emotions in check. Was I in any way unclear? Not at all. I understand you didn't know Andre was related to Georgi prior to the meeting in the conference room. Is that correct? Danielle nodded once. And that you began a partnership with Andre and Lonnie and Stephen Hamlin months ago. Is that also correct? Danielle nodded again, not surprised to learn they knew everything. They must have run a full search on her over the weekend. Further, Georgi told you to remain in our employment but also keep dating his son. Is that correct? Danielle affirmed that it was. Are you still seeing Andre? Danielle hedged her bets just in case she and Lars didn't reach an agreement. I've not had the final conversation with him, no. Lars's expression modified subtly as he processed her words. The lips that she'd stared so much over the last few months pressed, spreading the heart shape fuller and wider. This man didn't have a bad look or a bad day, not even when he was consumed with anger as he was now. So, you have already decided to end things? Danielle replied with the same objectivity that he was using. We made a deal, Lars, the first day I was here. What do you expect me to do? Please say that you will make an exception to the rule, she silently voiced to him. And if you don't, I have the numbers to back up that I'm invaluable to the firm. As the managing director, you know what I want you to do. I've already spoken to Georgi on the matter. He won't allow a change of accounts. Lars paused, waiting for a reaction. That information doesn't look like it surprises you. Danielle's thumbs rubbed one another. Georgi is rather vocal in his opinions. He is also a good client that I don't want to see leave the firm, nor do I want all of his referrals and those of his other clients, all directed at you, to go elsewhere. Here it comes, thought Danielle. He's going to tell me my job is safe, but to be discreet. I've spoken with the partners, Danielle, and we recognize your contribution. It's been significant. These, he continued, lifting the papers in the air, show you have been and are the top performer in gold and currency. In truth, you don't even have any real competition. He slid the papers towards her, which she left sitting. She didn't need to look at the documents to confirm what she'd seen on the boards week after week. You have a choice to make, Danielle. Go elsewhere with the accounts remaining here until the 12 months are up, or stop seeing Andre. If you elect to resign, we won't go after you for back pay. Your numbers far exceeded the quota we gave you, even after we doubled it, so we've come out ahead. However, you will be liable to pay a percentage of the money that follows you elsewhere. You will also be liable for the money that would have gone to Russell's in commissions under our agreement." Danielle swallowed hard. They weren't firing her outright because she was too valuable. Just as Georgi had said, they, Lars, were basically issuing a cease and desist against Andre. No exceptions, no bending of the rules. She would have to give up Andre for the remainder of her contract and then leave. Danielle recalled Glenda's comment about being bold and figured she didn't have much to lose. "Are you telling me that you've never dated a client?" she asked him. Lars raised his chin slightly. "No, and I will also volunteer that it ended badly for everyone involved." "Here in the States," she pressed. Lars pushed his lips to one side. "New York?" "Why is it the rules apply to me and not to you?" "Because I have $1 billion stake in this firm. You don't. More importantly, I don't make actual trades. I make some for me personally, but the clients are managed by objective, unaffiliated traders, not me." She remained calm. "By definition, Lars, you manage every single client. You meet the big ones when they sign. You are present for update meetings. Are you telling me you don't have influence over who comes here and who stays on?" Lars leaned forward like a cat staring down a much smaller animal. "Although you raise good points, my job is not in question here. Yours is." "Fair enough," she responded. "Now let's make this about me for a second. I've brought in $5 billion more than MRD previously had. How much have I personally made you?" Lars's eyes flicked. $438 million and change. "Remember that the next time you see me alone at your company functions, and don't give me any shit about it." She'd intended to sound detached, but she came across as bitchy, and that wasn't her intent. Lars was nonplussed by her declaration. "Danielle, I didn't make this choice. You did." She pulled her eyes away from his, looking out to the water. This had been an amazing journey, full of unexpected surprises and emotional highs. Some of the best memories of her life had occurred in this country. As her father said, she'd fallen in love regardless of her intentions not to do so, but how hard had caught even her by surprise. In that split second, reason righted itself. She knew Zurich was a better place for her to be than back home, where her dating life was non-existent and her career track marginal. She and Andre could still have a relationship, albeit a truncated one. They could talk on the phone, email, Skype. It wasn't as if they were forbidden to do anything. Furthermore, they were business partners. She'd see him at meetings, non-professional interactions, as the attorney had said. "You're right, Lars," she said, looking him in the eye. "It is completely my responsibility and not yours. I'm sorry." She said no more, but waited for him to speak, which he didn't do for many seconds. Looking at him, she felt the rise of an emotion close to anger, but it crested into the fascination she often felt when she was in his presence. "Danielle, there are many smart, attractive men in this town. Not all are clients." "No," she thought. "Some are co-workers sitting right here in front of me."